What's up, everybody? It is Peaceful here. I'm going to do something a little different than I usually do today. So please let me know down below whether you all like this sort of content, whether you want to see more of this come next Infinity Conquest season. But what we're going to do today is we're going to go through a couple decks that I took to an Infinite Avatar just this week in Infinity Conquest, why I think they're good choices for you over this weekend if you're still trying to get that Infinity Avatar that you've been wanting to get. Then I'm going to go over 3 tips that I think will help you achieve that Infinity Conquest goal. Tips that I see people not following often in Conquest, and honestly are a big part of the reason I got my 2 avatars this week. So before we get into it, just as always, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button. Let me know down in the comments whether you like this content, whether you want to see more of it. This all helps me in the algorithm, helps me my channel grow, and I really do appreciate it. Now let's go ahead and get into it. Here is the first deck that I took to an Infinity Avatar this month. This is Lammy's Loki Bounce deck. And this deck is super sweet. Now, I know not everybody's the biggest fan of Loki, and I totally respect that. So if you don't want to play a Loki deck, I do have another good list for you after this one. But this deck is incredibly strong. With the changes to Wave and Mobius, there's basically nothing to stop this sort of deck from just running rampant in the metagame. So very solid list, very, very consistent. This deck does its thing and it does it very well. You're just trying to stack points, win a couple lanes, and then if the matchup is something you're a little weak into, something like a little bit more over the top, you just play Loki and a lot of times do what they're trying to do better. So your typical Loki list, you see this is very low curve, very low to the ground. It's running Falcon and Beast to go with Werewolf by Night. This is the free up space for your Werewolf by Night so you can bounce it around. And my biggest piece of advice to you with this deck is definitely play a few games with it before going into Infinity Conquest, because this deck is hard as all to play. One of the hardest decks I've ever had to play in Snap. People hate on Loki, and I totally get it. It is a very oppressive sort of strategy. It kind of reminds me of old school Leader and Galactus, where it's just very unfun to play against. But that does not mean it's an easy deck to play. I see a lot of people playing Loki because I think they hear how it's the greatest deck that's ever been made, blah, 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 unbeatable, super OP. And it is, if you know what you're doing. And I made plenty of mistakes with this deck and lost several conquests before I was able to take it to the Infinity Avatar. But once I had the hang of it down, it became very easy. So just real quick advice. If you're going to play this deck, know what line of play you want to go for. This is advice I got from Lammy himself. This is not something that I came up with, but it is extremely helpful. You see, you've got Elsa in this deck, you've got Collector, you've got Werewolf by Night. And if you think about it, Elsa and Werewolf by Night do not have the most synergy ever together. So what you really want to do very early is identify what your hand is going to be able to do best and then go for that line. Sometimes it's going to be an Elsa line with your 1-drops Falcon and Beast. Sometimes it's going to be a Werewolf by Night line with your 1-drops and Beast and Falcon. And then sometimes it's going to be just a Collector Elsa Loki line where you're just playing sort of that sort of curve out game and trying to just outstat your opponent and steal their game plan a little bit. Loki is not always your game plan, as in stealing the cards is not always your game plan. If it's a deck like destroy or discard, you can often get a pretty amazing hand, but there's also times where you're going to get a hand and it's going to be a bunch of pretty weak cards that don't go super well together because you don't have the board build up for it. Things like destroy, especially if you don't Loki right on 4 with a pretty light board, it's hard to get enough synergy with destroy to make it worth it. Really, the best thing you can steal is null. So knowing when it's right to steal their deck is a huge part of this, but also just knowing which line to go for, sequencing your cards correctly. Be very, very careful with that, especially with Werewolf by Night. I missed multiple triggers with Werewolf by Night just because you play sometimes 3 or 4 on reveal cards in a turn. And it's very easy to just, sequence out your plays for Werewolf by Night, then realize for some other reason, oh, I need to do this instead, switch your plays around a little bit, and then suddenly you didn't sequence it properly for Werewolf by Night and you miss out on some of those triggers, and that can be pretty devastating. So just be very careful of that. That said, this is probably the best deck in the game right now. I don't know what the stats say. What I do know is last time I looked at Untapped, this was at like a 63% win rate in Conquest. The only change I made from Lammy's list is he was running Shang and I switched in Mirage because I was honestly scared of the mirror. And in the mirror, if you have Shang and they don't, that's just like an auto loss most of the time when they have Loki, and that's pretty pretty unfortunate. So I don't really want that to happen. It ended up being, if I'd had Shang instead of Mirage, I think my Infinity Avatar run would have been a lot easier than it ended up being. So that's kind of up to you. That's the flex spot right there is Mirage. So switch that out if you'd like for something like Shang or Shadow King or something. Just remember that if you play the mirror match, that's going to make your matchup a lot worse. Next up, we have the tried and true, my boy Thanos. And I played a pretty stock style of Thanos list, obviously with some of my own choices for inclusions. You see there's a Cosmo in here, and there's Claw instead of Blue Marvel. If you've watched my videos enough, you know that I'm not a fan of Blue Marvel and Thanos decks unless it's a very specific circumstance like it was with the Spectrum deck where you're really trying to go a lot wider to the board. But the this deck is just really good. Your main play line is obviously Professor X and Goliath. That's just going to win you a lot of games for free. But there's the thing I love about Thanos is you can win in so many other different ways, especially now with Nico and Elsa. You can really build out some like different styles of game plans depending on what the locations give you. So if you want some in-depth advice on this deck, I'm not going to go into it in this video because honestly, I have like 5 different Thanos deck guides on this channel already, and they're all still very relevant for this deck. I actually think I have almost this exact list in a video. I will link it here in a card for you, and I'll put the video link in the description as well. So check those out if you want some advice on playing this deck. But really what I wanted to go into today more than anything else were some tips for you while you're playing Infinity Conquest. What I've noticed a lot in the comments that I get on Twitter when I post my winning deck list, and what I've noticed a lot in the games that I've played, is that there are just a lot of very simple things that people could fix that would honestly give them a much better chance at winning an Infinity Conquest. So we're going to go ahead and go into those for a little bit. First thing I wanted to go over is consistency. Consistency is king in Conquest. And what do I mean by consistency? Well, you might be thinking I'm talking about deck lists, but actually I'm not. That is an important thing in the sense that you need a deck that can at least win or that can at least do something powerful a majority of the time. If you're taking a deck that you haven't proven or haven't really tried enough, then yeah, you're going to have some issues. But something like Thanos, even though it's not always the most consistent, it's because of the stones, is still a good choice for Conquest because what you do on average is powerful enough to win games with Marvel Snap. What I am actually talking about here is your play, consistency in your play, snapping early when you should, retreating when you should, playing to the percentages, paying attention to opponent tendencies and what they're doing. If you are being consistent and doing things the way you should be doing and playing in a way that you can consistently replicate, you are much more likely to win games with Conquest. Don't change your plays just because you're in Infinity Conquest. Don't start doing different things than you would normally do or taking risks that you wouldn't normally take suddenly because you're in Infinity Conquest. What you want to do is you want to play these just like you would play a normal match of Conquest in any other mode. Obviously, I know everybody plays Proving Grounds a little different. A lot of people like to snap early in that. That's not what I'm talking about, obviously. What I mean here is just don't let the idea of Infinity Conquest get in your head. It's just another match of Conquest. And if you play it correctly, if you play to your outs, if you play the way that got you those Infinity tickets in the first place, on average, you're going to do pretty well. You know, you got to remember this is a card game with a lot of RNG. You can have 10 tickets and, you know, you're just not going to convert on average more than maybe 1 or 2 of those because that's just the way percentages work. If you're one of the best players in the game, like say like Lammy, who we used his deck list here in the video, Lammy's win rate overall is probably like in the 60%, like 60%, like 60 to 65 if I had to guess, maybe a little bit higher, because that's just the way Conquest works, you know? There's a lot of RNG that's outside of your control. So even the best players in the game, like Lammy, I would probably say don't get much higher than 70% on their win rate, which means, you know, you're only winning 7 out of 10 matches, which means 3.5 out of 5 for Infinity Conquest on average. So you're not going to convert a lot of those into 5 wins. That's just the way it's going to work. So don't get tilted. Don't get frustrated. Don't start doing things differently than you would normally do just because you're in an Infinity Conquest. Number 2, don't overthink it. So this ties a little bit similar to what some of the stuff we talked about in tip number 1, but don't overthink the conquest itself, right? I've had a lot of comments on Twitter where it's like, oh, Infinity Conquest just feels impossible, blah, blah, blah. There, you get one bad matchup and suddenly you're out of it. You do this, you do that. That's just not true. I've won. Yes, sometimes you play a deck that is weak to certain other strategies, right? Destroy, and then suddenly you run into Inshinot, and they've got armor and Cosmo in their deck, and you're very sad. Okay, that does happen, but that's not an unwinnable matchup. I've sat and watched plenty of streamers, plenty of my friends win matchups into virtually what some people would consider unwinnable matchups because they snapped appropriately, retreated appropriately, played appropriately, and didn't let it get in their head. The more you sit there and hem and haw and moan and cry and go, oh, it sucks. I got such bad matchups, blah, blah, blah. The more likely that you are going to make some sort of mistake because your head's not in the game. You've got to be focused on what's going on in front of you. Now, the second part of this, don't suddenly start overthinking games because you are in an Infinity Conquest. Just because your opponent is playing Infinity Conquest doesn't mean that they're Lammy Series or Browd or any of the major streamers, Harry, Nina. It doesn't mean that they're this amazing player. They're just another player in the game. And even if it is, you're not going to win by trying to second guess yourself and overthink every single play you make. You're going to win by playing correctly and optimally and making the proper reads on what they're trying to do. And the more you can just play appropriately, the better you're going to do. Don't overthink every little thing. All right. Again, this is still just a conquest match. The more you can just treat this like any other conquest match that you try to win in any other mode, the more likely it is you're going to win 5 in a row and get that Infinity Avatar. Last thing, curiosity killed the conquest. Yes, I know I'm very original. Dad jokes. They come with the territory. All right. But my point here is staying because you might be able to win and you want to see what happens is fine if you're just playing on ladder for fun, or fine if you're playing improving grounds for fun. But you're playing an Infinity Conquest and staying for that 4-cuber or 8-cuber where you're like, I don't know if I can win this, but let's see what happens. It's not going to work out for you. Okay. You need to play smart and you need to play to your percentages. If you are less than 50%, don't stay. There are times where honestly it is correct to stay on a 50%er where it's a coin flip where you've got one location locked down for sure and winning one of the other two is just a coin flip. Sometimes if you think you've got a good read on what your opponent's going to do, then yeah, it's a good idea to stay. But that when it's less than 50%, when it's more of just you're just kind of throwing your hands up and going, all right, well, let's see what happens. You cannot be upset if you lose that game of Conquest. Now, I will make one small caveat to this one. If you are playing a horrible matchup, like something that you generally just can never win, it's sometimes correct to stay in those situations, but that's a different thing. That's a calculated risk where you look at the percentages and you're like, yeah, I'm probably 40% to win this match or this round if I let it play out, but I'm only like 30% to win this match against this opponent if I retreat here. So I actually have better odds overall if I just stay. All right. That's a different situation. But if it's a matchup that you're perfectly capable of winning and you just decide to stay for a round because you want to see what happens or because you might win it and that would be really cool, don't get upset when you lose 4 cubes and are in a huge hole and end up losing that match of Conquest. All right, play smart, play to your percentages, play to your outs, retreat when you should retreat. Don't be scared of the 2-cube or 4-cube retreats. They hurt, they sting. Don't get me wrong, it's not ideal, but sometimes when you put yourself in that situation, you got to do the smartest thing in that situation. And maybe that wasn't even like you snapped a bad hand. Maybe you had a really good hand and they just ended up having a better one. Sometimes you just got to give your opponent props and move on to the next game. But if you stay for 8 on that 10% chance that you're still going to somehow win because they make a mistake, when they get you for 8 cubes, now you pretty much are done. And coming back from 8 cubes down is almost impossible. So don't let curiosity get to you. Make a smart decision. Just leave. That's all I got for you today. No gameplay videos. Honestly, a lot of the games I won in Infinity Conquest yesterday, I do think these decks are great, but a lot of the games I won were more about my opponent making some of the above listed mistakes, staying for rounds they shouldn't have, overthinking things. I had an opponent play Hela into MODOK behind their Invisible Woman and lose 8 cubes for it because they just made a mistake on the last turn because they let the pressure of Infinity Conquest get to them and then immediately retreated. You've just got to be disciplined and make the right choices. And it's just a game, friends. All right, it's just a game. It's Marvel Snap. Have fun. Enjoy yourself. Don't overthink it. Play smart. Play responsibly, and you're gonna eventually get there. I promise. I am not by no means the best Marvel Snap player. I'm probably just above average, and I got 2 tickets just yesterday. So make sure you follow my advice. Play smart. Don't let Infinity Conquest get into your head. Enjoy yourself. It's Marvel Snap, just a game. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.